The annual Morrison family Thanksgiving had always been a showcase of success. This year was no different, except that my sister Jessica was practically vibrating with excitement over her latest career breakthrough. "The merger is almost final," she announced, cutting into her turkey with precise, manicured strokes. "Once Stone Global partners with our firm, I'll be heading the entire West Coast division." I hid my smile behind a sip of wine. Stone Global, the mysterious tech consulting giant that had the business world buzzing. The company Jessica had been trying to court for months. "That's wonderful, honey," Mom beamed. "Another brilliant achievement. You always did know how to aim high." Dad nodded approvingly. "Takes after me, she does. Born with business sense." Then, like clockwork, they all turned to me with their usual mix of pity and disappointment. I learned to recognize the exact moment it would happen at these family gatherings. Right after praising the successful child, time to check on the failure. "And how's your job going, Diana?" Mom asked delicately, as if the word might break if she said it too forcefully. "Still at that reception desk," Jessica added with a smirk. "What company was it again? I can never remember." "Palmer Technologies," I said quietly, pushing mashed potatoes around my plate. "And yes, still answering phones." Jessica's smirk widened. 8 years now, isn't it? Well, I suppose someone has to do it. Not everyone can handle the pressure of real corporate success. If she only knew that her precious merger depended entirely on my signature, not that she ever discovered Stone Global was just one of my company's many aliases. The truth was almost too delicious to keep to myself. Almost. Speaking of Palmer Technologies, our cousin Michael chimed in. "Didn't they just get acquired by some bigger firm? Hope you don't lose your job, Diana. Though I'm sure Jessica could find you something entry-level at her company." I nodded vaguely, remembering the acquisition papers I'd signed last week. Palmer Technologies was indeed under new ownership, mine, just like the other 12 companies I'd quietly purchased over the past 5 years. The story of how I built my empire while my family thought I was just a receptionist started 8 years ago, though the seeds were planted much earlier. Growing up in the Morrison family meant constant pressure to follow the approved path. Prestigious business school, corporate ladder, corner office with a view. Jessica embraced it wholeheartedly. I had different ideas. Computer science. Dad had exploded when I announced my college major. "What kind of career can you build with that? You need a business degree to succeed in this world." Mom had been more subtle in her disapproval, but just as firm. "Darling, wouldn't you rather follow your sister's path? Look how well she's doing at Harvard Business School." But I stuck to my choice. While Jessica was memorizing business theories, I was learning to code. While she networked at cocktail parties, I built programs that would revolutionize how companies handled data security. By graduation, I had developed an encryption algorithm that caught the attention of several major tech firms. I sold it for $2 million, but not to any of the obvious buyers. Instead, I worked through shell companies and intermediaries, keeping my name out of every transaction. That was when I learned the power of anonymity. In the tech world, especially in cybersecurity, being unknown was an asset. Companies would pay premium prices to mysterious developers who could solve their problems without wanting public credit. So I started my first company under a different name, then another, and another. Each one specialized in a different aspect of tech consulting, but all operated under the umbrella of my main corporation, which would eventually become Stone Global. The receptionist job at Palmer Technologies was originally just a cover story to appease my family. I needed something believable, something that would keep them from asking too many questions about my real work. But it turned into something far more valuable, an inside view of how traditional companies operated and, more importantly, failed. I watched as Palmer's management made mistake after mistake, missing opportunities that were obvious to anyone paying attention. When their stock price started to fall, I was ready. Through one of my shell companies, I began buying shares. Quietly, strategically, never enough at once to raise suspicion. The same pattern played out with other companies. While Jessica climbed the corporate ladder the traditional way, I was building a web of interconnected businesses, each piece carefully hidden behind layers of corporate anonymity. "More turkey, Diana?" Mom's voice pulled me back to the present. "Though you should be careful, receptionists need to maintain a professional appearance." I accepted the extra serving, thinking about the memo I needed to review after dinner. The one about Jessica's company and their desperate attempt to partner with Stone Global. The irony was almost too perfect. You know, Jessica said, reaching for her wine glass. My firm is launching a new tech division. We might need someone to handle the phones. Would you be interested in a change? The pay would probably be better than what you're making now. I thought about my net worth, currently hovering around $3.8 billion, and managed not to laugh. I'm comfortable where I am, but thanks. Comfortable, she sighed. That's your problem, Diana. You've never pushed yourself to achieve anything more. You're too comfortable being ordinary. Dad shook his head. At least she has steady work. Though I still think you could have done more with your life if you'd listened to us about business school. I took another sip of wine, remembering the latest Forbes article about Stone Global, the mysterious tech giant reshaping the industry. The reporter had tried for weeks to uncover the identity of the founder, speculating about various high-profile tech moguls and business leaders. No one had even come close to guessing it might be the quiet woman who supposedly answered phones at Palmer Technologies. Jessica, Mom said eagerly, tell us more about this merger with Stone Global. It sounds so exciting. My sister straightened up, preening. Well, I can't reveal too much, but let's just say I've been personally handling the negotiations. The CEO is very impressed with my proposals. I nearly choked on my wine. I had never even spoken to Jessica. All communication was handled through various executives and lawyers. Her proposals had been uniformly terrible, but I kept the process going because I needed access to her firm's client list. They're extremely selective about their partnerships, Jessica continued. The fact that they're even considering us is a huge compliment to my leadership. More like a testament to their due diligence, I muttered under my breath. What was that? Jessica asked sharply. Nothing, I smiled. Just thinking about how selective some companies can be. She narrowed her eyes. Well, it's not something you'd understand, given your position. Corporate strategy at this level is quite complex. If she only knew how many times I'd sat in my private boardroom, reviewing her company's painfully amateurish merger proposals, or how many of her brilliant innovations had made my executive team cringe. Speaking of positions, my Aunt Martha chimed in. Didn't you used to do something with computers, Diana? In college? Computer science degree, Dad grunted. Never did anything with it, though. I thought about the 3 patents currently revolutionizing cybersecurity, all registered under various shell companies, about the encryption software protecting government agencies around the world, about the artificial intelligence system I developed that was quietly transforming how global corporations handled data. Never really found my niche in tech, I said mildly, passing the cranberry sauce. As dinner wound down, Jessica couldn't resist one more dig. Don't worry, Diana. Not everyone is cut out for success. Someone has to answer the phones, right? I smiled, thinking about the meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning, the one where Stone Global's CEO would finally be revealed to her firm's management team. You're absolutely right, I said. Someone has to answer the phones. By the way, good luck with that merger. I have a feeling tomorrow's meeting will be very illuminating. Jessica raised an eyebrow, but before she could respond, her phone buzzed. Her eyes widened as she read the message. The Stone Global CEO is coming to tomorrow's meeting in person, she gasped. This is huge. They never make personal appearances. Mom clapped her hands in delight. Oh, Jessica, they must be really impressed with you. Well, I said, standing up, I should head home. Early day tomorrow. Lots of phones to answer. As I drove home to my penthouse apartment, the one my family thought was a modest studio in a questionable neighborhood, I couldn't help but smile. Tomorrow would certainly be interesting. My phone buzzed with a message from my executive assistant. Final merger documents are ready for your review, Ms. Morrison. Also, the Forbes reporter is still trying to schedule an interview with Stone Global's mysterious CEO. I texted back. Tell Forbes I'll consider an interview next week. But first, we have a merger meeting to attend. Tomorrow, Jessica would finally learn who really owned the company she'd been trying so desperately to impress. Tomorrow, my family would discover that their ordinary daughter had built an empire while they weren't looking. But tonight, I was just Diana, the receptionist who didn't amount to much. And somehow, that made tomorrow's revelation even sweeter. The next morning, I arrived at Jessica's firm 30 minutes early, not as the CEO of Stone Global, But as Diana, the receptionist, wearing the same modest clothes I'd worn to Thanksgiving dinner, the security guard barely glanced at me as I walked through the lobby. My executive team was already in place, scattered throughout the building in various roles. My CFO posed as a maintenance worker. My head of operations sat in the lobby reading a newspaper. My chief legal officer was disguised as a coffee cart vendor. At precisely 9:55 a.m., Jessica strutted through the lobby in her designer suit, not even noticing me sitting quietly in the corner. She was too busy barking orders into her phone. I want everything perfect for this meeting. The Stone Global CEO never makes personal appearances. This is our chance to really impress them. I smiled, remembering how many times I'd reviewed her company's proposals, each one more desperate than the last. They needed this merger badly. Their last 3 quarters had been disastrous, though they'd managed to keep that quiet. At 10 a.m. sharp, I stood up and walked to the elevator. Jessica was already in the conference room with her management team, probably rehearsing her presentation one last time. I changed in my private elevator, the one installed secretly during the building's last renovation. The modest dress was replaced by a tailored Armani suit. The simple ponytail became an elegant updo. Even my posture changed, transforming from the apologetic slouch of someone used to being overlooked to the confident stance of a woman who owned everything around her. My executive team converged on the conference room floor, shedding their disguises as they walked. By the time we reached the doors, we were no longer playing parts. We were Stone Global's leadership, ready to reveal exactly who they'd been trying to impress all these months. The room fell silent as we entered. Jessica stood at the head of the table, her presentation ready to go. Her smile faltered slightly as she saw me. "Diana, what are you doing here? This is a private meeting." I walked to the other end of the table, my team arranging themselves around me. "Hello, Jessica, Mom, Dad." Our parents sat along one side of the table. Jessica had invited them to witness her moment of triumph. "Perfect. I don't understand," Jessica stammered. "Where is the CEO of Stone Global?" "You're looking at her," I said quietly. The silence that followed was absolute. Jessica's mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. Mom dropped her designer handbag. Dad's face went from red to white to red again. "That's impossible." Jessica finally managed. "You're a receptionist. You answer phones at Palmer Technologies." Actually, my CFO interjected smoothly. "Ms. Morrison owns Palmer Technologies, along with 12 other major tech companies. Stone Global is just one division of her larger corporation." I sat down at the head of the table, enjoying the way Jessica's perfect posture had crumbled into shocked slumping. "Palmer Technologies was my first acquisition," I explained. "I kept the receptionist story as a cover while I built something bigger, something none of you could see because you were too busy feeling sorry for me." But, Mom sputtered. All these years, I continued, "I've been building an empire while you thought I was just answering phones. Every time you pitied me, every time you made jokes about my wasted potential, I was signing deals worth more than this entire building." My chief legal officer passed out folders. "These are the real merger terms. As you'll see, they're quite different from what you were expecting." Jessica finally found her voice. "This is some kind of joke. Some kind of trick. Check the business registrations," I suggested mildly. "The patents. The corporate filings. Stone Global's founder and CEO has always been Diana Morrison. I just never bothered to correct anyone's assumptions about who I was or what I did." Dad grabbed one of the folders, his hands shaking as he read. "These numbers. This is currently valued at just over $3.8 billion. My CFO supplied helpfully. "Though that's a conservative estimate." "The computer science degree," Mom whispered, "the one we told you was worthless, led to 3 major patents in cybersecurity. The encryption software I developed is now used by governments worldwide. The artificial intelligence system I created has transformed corporate data management." I leaned forward. "Still think I should have gone to business school." Jessica slumped in her chair, her perfect facade cracking completely. "All those proposals I sent, you were reading them. Every painful word," I confirmed. "Though I particularly enjoyed the one where you claimed to understand the future of tech security, especially since you were using my software to write it." "Why?" she demanded. "Why keep up this pretense? Why let us think?" Because you taught me something valuable, I cut in. All of you did. You taught me that people see what they expect to see. You expected me to be a failure, so that's what you saw. It was the perfect cover for building something extraordinary. I stood up, smoothing my designer suit. Now about this merger. The terms are non-negotiable. Your company will become a subsidiary of Stone Global, with significant management changes. I looked directly at Jessica, starting with your position. You're firing me, she gasped. Not exactly. I'm demoting you to where you should have started, an entry-level position where you can learn the business properly, not just play at being an executive. Dad started to protest, but I held up my hand. This isn't personal, Dad, it's business. Isn't that what you always taught us? The next hour was a blur of contracts, terms, and shocked realizations. My parents sat in stunned silence as their worldview completely inverted. Jessica alternated between anger and disbelief as she realized her career had been in my hands all along. As the meeting wound down, Mom finally asked the question I'd been waiting for. Why reveal yourself now? Why not stay hidden? I smiled, gathering my papers. Because sometimes success isn't just about building something great. Sometimes it's about showing the people who doubted you exactly what they failed to see. Walking out of the conference room, I paused by Jessica's chair. By the way, the reception desk at Palmer Technologies, it's actually empty. I never worked there. I own the building. The drive home that evening was surprisingly peaceful. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from family members who'd heard the news. Cousins who'd mocked my dead-end job now wanted to know if I was hiring. Aunts and uncles who'd used me as a cautionary tale suddenly remembered how they'd always believed in me. I ignored them all, instead calling my real estate agent about a new property I'd been eyeing. Coincidentally, right next door to Jessica's house. The one she'd been so proud of buying with her executive salary. A week later, I sat in my real office, the top floor of the Stone Global building, reading the latest Forbes article about the tech industry's most surprising CEO. The reporter had finally gotten their interview, and the story of the secret billionaire receptionist was making waves. My assistant buzzed in. Your sister is here to see you. She says it's about her new position. I smiled, remembering all the times Jessica had made me wait in lobbies. Tell her she can schedule an appointment with HR like everyone else. Sometimes success isn't about proving people wrong. Sometimes it's about letting them discover just how wrong they've been, all on their own. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Thanksgiving dinner this year, will you still come? I thought about it for a moment, then replied, of course. But this time, I'm hosting. At my real house. After all, what's the point of building an empire if you can't enjoy watching people realize they've been eating dinner with a billionaire who they thought just answered phones? The best revenge isn't served cold. It's served in a penthouse office with a view of the city you secretly own, watching people realize that the sister they pitied now signs their paychecks. And somewhere in a Stone Global building, there's still an empty reception desk. A reminder that success doesn't always look the way people expect it to. Sometimes it looks like a quiet woman in modest clothes, sitting in the corner, building an empire while everyone else is too busy feeling superior to notice.
I sat at the long mahogany table in my parents' New Jersey dining room, trying to keep my expression neutral while the familiar parade of criticism began. My mother, Eleanor, held up a credit card statement with a sigh that carried years of judgment. Lila, 3 international trips this quarter. Honestly, how do you call yourself responsible with money? My father, Thomas, adjusted his gold Rolex and leaned back in his chair, voice firm but measured. And what about leaving that prestigious position at Morgan Stanley? You could have had a secure career path, a clear trajectory. Instead, you're running what exactly some consulting hobby. The table between us was littered with credit cards and monthly statements. Evidence in their eyes of a reckless lifestyle I had carefully orchestrated to appear indulgent. They didn't see that my so-called extravagance was part of a much larger plan, and every hotel bill, every overseas flight, had a purpose beyond what they could imagine. I sipped water, letting their words roll over me, maintaining a calm composure I had cultivated over years of similar dinners. Their worry and condescension contrasted sharply with my quiet confidence. I knew more than they ever suspected. Each complaint, Each admonishment was a reminder of the role I had to play until the time was right, as they debated whether I was truly financially responsible. I checked my phone briefly, noting another message from my team confirming preparations for the next step. I set the phone down and smiled politely at my mother, nodding as if her lecture mattered, all while thinking about the moves that were already in motion. The conversation shifted to my supposed lack of stability, and I prepared to navigate their concerns while keeping my plan on track. I shifted slightly in my seat, pretending to reach for my water glass while my fingers brushed against my phone tucked discreetly in my lap. A new notification popped up: final acquisition documents ready for review. First national bank deal proceeding as scheduled. I glanced at it quickly, heart steady, and slid the phone back under the table, letting the tension of the moment mask my inner excitement. Mom droned on about budgeting and long-term stability, completely unaware that each of my so-called leisure trips had been meticulously planned client and acquisition meetings across Europe and Asia. Every five-star hotel stay, every dinner with foreign investors had been a calculated move in the larger game. They only saw the glamour, never the strategy. Dad's gaze shifted toward me, scanning for any hint of indulgence or irresponsibility. I offered a polite nod as if I understood his concern, letting the conversation flow around me while my mind ran through the next steps: SEC filings, board notifications, and final confirmations from my team. Each task aligned perfectly with the timeline we had constructed months ago. Maya, my assistant, had sent another message an hour earlier confirming the international divisions were ready to consolidate reports and initiate the formal announcement. I could feel the invisible threads of the empire I was weaving stretching far beyond this suburban dining room, yet neither parent had the faintest idea of how much power I already held. As Mom continued her lecture about financial prudence and career expectations, I kept my calm, internalizing their doubts and using them to sharpen my focus. I checked one last notification from my acquisition team, noting the timeline for the board meeting that would officially shift control. I put my phone away and smiled politely, letting my parents' voices wash over me, all while knowing the real game had already begun. Their discussion meandered to my supposed lack of experience, and I prepared to navigate their skepticism without revealing a single detail of the empire quietly forming at my fingertips. Mom's voice grew sharper, cutting through the polite hum of the dining room. "Lila, we need proof that you're managing your finances responsibly. You can't just jet off to Europe for another conference without showing some stability." She leaned forward, eyes narrowing as if she could peer directly into my bank accounts. Dad added his own stern note, tapping the table with a finger adorned by a heavy gold ring. "You left a high-paying position at Morgan Stanley. You could have climbed the ladder, earned real influence. Now what exactly are you doing? Consulting some vague clients? How do we know you're not just throwing money around?" I kept my expression calm, sipping my water slowly. Inside, I was reviewing acquisition milestones, noting which documents were ready for signature and which divisions were awaiting final confirmations. Every step had been anticipated, every outcome planned. My parents' skepticism floated around me like static, irritating but inconsequential. Mom reached for my credit card, her hand hovering as if she could physically wrestle responsibility from my grip. "Until you demonstrate some real accountability, I'm restricting this." Her words hung in the air, heavy with authority. I smiled politely, letting her think she had some control. Even as my mind ran through the timing of the upcoming board notifications and SEC filings, I imagined how surprised they would be when the freeze they attempted would effectively only lock their own assets. My control over the bank and the credit systems meant every card they held, every account they thought was theirs, was already under my oversight. Their attempts to curb me were irrelevant in the grand scheme. Dad's lecture continued, layering warnings with financial advice, but I felt none of it pressing. I noted the next team update would confirm the final merger documents had cleared internal audit and that the European acquisitions were fully integrated. Each piece of the puzzle was falling into place while they insisted I needed to prove competence they assumed I lacked. As their voices merged into a single, insistent drone. I shifted my attention briefly to my phone, watching another notification confirm the timeline for the official board meeting. I placed it back discreetly, folding my hands calmly as I nodded at my mother, allowing her to believe she was guiding the conversation while I silently orchestrated the next step of a plan they could never see coming. Their concerns lingered in the air as I prepared for the moment when their disbelief would meet undeniable proof. And the boardroom stage was set for the first act of the reveal. Mom slid her platinum card across the table toward me, voice firm. Until you prove financial responsibility, this is being frozen. She glanced at Dad for support, and he nodded, tapping his gold Rolex impatiently. Their authority felt absolute in that moment. Yet I couldn't help the small, knowing smile that tugged at the corners of my lips. I kept my expression neutral, allowing them to feel the weight of their decision, even as I internally reviewed the chain of control I had quietly established. Every card, every account, every transaction they thought they could restrict was already under my oversight. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very tool they used to enforce discipline would be rendered meaningless by the system I had put in place. For a moment, I considered confronting them, revealing the depth of the plan I had executed over months. But patience had its own power, and I knew the timing of the reveal would multiply its impact. I let the card sit on the polished surface of the table, as if it had any effect at all. Dad leaned forward, voice low but sharp. You need to understand, Lila, that we're only trying to guide you. One wrong move and it's your reputation at stake. I nodded politely, absorbing the lecture while my mind mapped the upcoming board notifications, SEC filings, and final acquisition steps. Every move they tried to enforce, every rule they imagined they were setting, had already been anticipated and neutralized. As Mom drummed her fingers against the table, I allowed their concern to fill the room, letting them believe they held control. Behind the surface, I was calculating the exact moment when the illusion would shatter, when the cards they thought they had frozen would become the symbol of my authority, not theirs. With their lecture running its course, I glanced at my phone, noting the next confirmation from my team, and prepared to continue navigating their doubts as the larger plan moved forward. I discreetly checked my phone again, barely reacting as another notification appeared. The final SEC filings for the First National Bank acquisition had cleared, and the board had approved the integration schedule for the European and Asian divisions. At the same moment, a Forbes alert flashed mystery buyer set to acquire major regional banking chain. My heart maintained a steady rhythm, even as I imagined my parents' faces when they eventually understood the significance. Mom frowned, shaking her head as she glanced toward me. A mystery buyer, I don't see how this relates to you. Lila, you're still just consulting clients, aren't you? This isn't your world. Dad's scowl deepened, adjusting his cufflinks as if the physical gesture could assert control over events he barely understood. I allowed a faint, polite smile, letting them perceive only the mildest hint of confidence. While my mind worked through the final operational checks, there had been a minor issue with the regional board's internal approval. They hesitated over a clause regarding subsidiary oversight, but Maya had already handled it, forwarding the confirmed sign-off. Everything was on schedule. The table conversation continued, Mom lecturing about financial prudence, Dad emphasizing the importance of predictable career moves. Every word they spoke reinforced the public perception they clung to that I was still experimenting, still dabbling, still unproven. Meanwhile, the documents in my digital folder reflected billions in controlled assets, multiple acquisitions finalized, and an empire in motion. I noticed another Forbes notification analysts speculating on the identity of the mystery buyer, hinting at an insider with unprecedented global reach. The suspense of public speculation only sharpened the contrast between my hidden reality and the parental narrative. I sipped my water and nodded politely at another parental comment about responsibility, masking the exhilaration that coursed beneath the surface. Their disbelief persisted, the notion of my consulting hobby carrying all the weight of triviality. I allowed it, knowing that the timing of revelation would maximize its impact. Each alert from my team, each confirmation of approvals, each cleared filing was a silent drumbeat in the unfolding symphony of control. I set my phone aside, letting the conversation drift around me, their concerns serving as a perfect backdrop. The acquisition's public hints were emerging, and soon enough, the first signs of recognition would ripple through the financial world. As I glanced at the clock, I noted the timeline for the next board notification, preparing for the moment when their perception of reality would finally collide with the truth. Mom's hand froze mid-air, platinum card hovering as if it had suddenly become heavy. "What? What is happening?" she asked, her voice tense, eyes darting between the screen of her tablet and mine. Dad leaned forward, his confident posture faltering as he scrolled frantically through notifications on his phone. The numbers and alerts seemed to shift beneath his gaze, and for the first time, his gold Rolex no longer felt like a symbol of control. I maintained my calm composure, keeping my hands folded in front of me. A small, polite smile curved my lips, hinting at nothing, suggesting only that I was attentive to the conversation. Inside, I tracked the progress of the acquisition in real-time, subsidiaries integrating smoothly. Final board approvals confirmed, SEC filings completed. Every element was in motion exactly as I had planned. Mom tried to regain control, tapping the tablet to refresh the account balances. Her credit card, the one she had insisted on freezing, displayed a locked message, but it wasn't locked in the way she imagined. The issuing authority was already under my oversight. She didn't yet comprehend that the move she thought would limit me only highlighted the extent of my reach. Dad's confidence wavered further, his jaw tightening, as he realized that some of the alerts he received weren't errors but confirmations the corporate system now reflected my authority over accounts he assumed were untouchable. He opened his mouth, but the words faltered. I let the tension hang, nodding politely as if acknowledging their concern while silently guiding the next step of the plan. Every alert, every frozen account, every notification they stumbled over served to reinforce the gap between what they thought they controlled and the reality of my power. As Mom finally looked up, her eyes wide with a mix of alarm and disbelief, I returned my attention to my phone. Another notification confirmed the precise timing for the board meeting, signaling that the next phase of the acquisition was about to commence. Their doubts and fears would soon intersect with an undeniable reality, and the first act of the reveal was ready to unfold. I stepped into the First National Bank boardroom, the polished mahogany table stretching ahead, lined with familiar faces from the executive team and board members I had coordinated for months. Maya greeted me with a brief nod, signaling that everything was in order, from the integration reports to the finalized acquisition documents. The air felt taut, a quiet anticipation that mirrored the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. At the far end, I noticed my parents entering behind a senior board member. Their expressions were a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. Mom's eyes widened, and Dad's posture, usually so commanding, betrayed an unfamiliar uncertainty. I allowed myself the smallest smile, maintaining a composed front while internally preparing for the full reveal. As I took my seat at the head of the table, the final board notifications appeared on the screen behind me. All subsidiaries fully integrated, SEC filings confirmed, and control formally transferred. A brief hesitation flickered through my mind, an instinctive pause before executing the final steps that would fully assert my authority, but I pushed it aside. Timing and precision mattered more than any momentary doubt. I began the strategic presentation, outlining the vision for ethical banking, transparency, and sustainable growth. Charts and reports displayed on the screens behind me, highlighting projected efficiencies, global integration plans, and the steps already taken to secure the European and Asian divisions. Each point demonstrated not only mastery of the financial mechanics, but also a broader ethical framework that contrasted sharply with the rigid, self-interested practices my parents had long valued. Their disbelief intensified as I methodically explained the next phase of the merger, detailing capital allocations, board oversight, and operational restructuring. They had expected chaos, perhaps even amateur mismanagement. Instead, the reality before them was an impeccably orchestrated operation executed with precision. I watched them absorb the scope of the control I now held the same people who had questioned every move, every decision, and every expenditure. The board members shifted, some exchanging glances, recognizing the authority I commanded. My presentation concluded, and I allowed a brief pause to let the impact settle, their astonishment palpable. With the documents finalized and control fully established, I prepared to transition to the next phase, reshaping the legacy of the bank and redefining what leadership would look like under my direction. I directed my team to begin implementing the compliance and ethical banking protocols we had meticulously designed. Each division received updated operational guidelines, risk assessments, and reporting procedures. Maya ensured that every department head understood their responsibilities under the new framework, emphasizing transparency and accountability at every level. My parents observed from the sidelines, their expressions a mix of surprise and tentative pride. Mom's fingers drummed nervously against the table as she watched the systematic rollout, while Dad's posture stiffened as he realized the authority he once assumed over operations was now subordinate to the procedures I had established. Old privileges, long taken for granted, were quietly removed. Reserved executive parking spots, access to corporate credit accounts, and previously unchecked discretionary approvals were all restructured under the new compliance model. I maintained a measured tone, explaining the rationale behind each adjustment, making it clear that performance and adherence to policy, not tenure or family connections, determined standing within the organization. Despite the shift, I noticed subtle hints of acknowledgement from my parents. Mom's gaze lingered on the charts and reports, a grudging respect in her eyes, while Dad's tight jaw relaxed slightly as he witnessed the operational improvements in real time. Their struggle to accept the new hierarchy was palpable, yet their reactions hinted at the complex emotions of pride, disbelief, and adaptation. I walked through the room, reviewing implementation checkpoints and confirming that each department was aligned with the vision we had outlined. The transition was precise, efficient, and unmistakably under my control. With the legacy now reshaping under new ethical and operational standards, I prepared to address the wider world and the public recognition that would soon follow. By mid-morning, the headlines were unavoidable. CNBC reported the acquisition with graphics showing the full scope of control, highlighting the European and Asian subsidiaries that had been integrated under my oversight. The Wall Street Journal followed with an in-depth analysis of the strategic maneuvers that had enabled the consolidation, noting the ethical protocols and operational transparency that distinguished the merger from standard industry practice. I watched the coverage alongside my parents, who sat stiffly in the office lounge, Mom's hands clasped tightly in her lap, eyes wide as she followed the screen, while Dad's usual composure cracked into lines of disbelief and frustration. They had expected me to stumble, to be exposed as inexperienced or overambitious. Instead, the evidence on the screens confirmed every projection, every move I had carefully orchestrated. Messages from colleagues and partners began streaming in, congratulating me on the smooth transition, the ethical framework, and the financial acumen evident in the public filings. I absorbed each note, noting which communications required immediate response and which could wait, all while maintaining a composed front for my parents, who were still reeling from the revelation. Their private reactions were more complex. Mom's pride was faint but tangible, threaded through with hesitation and a lingering sense of incredulity. Dad shifted in his seat, eyes flicking between the stock tickers and the board reports, processing the reality that the authority he once commanded was now firmly in my hands. As the media continued to highlight the global significance of the acquisitions, I felt the subtle satisfaction of a plan executed flawlessly, each piece falling into place exactly as intended. The public recognition underscored the competence and strategy that my parents had long underestimated. With the coverage establishing the scope of my influence, I prepared to consolidate control further and guide the next steps of both operational and strategic management. With the acquisitions complete and operational protocols firmly in place, I moved to consolidate control across First National Bank and my expanding financial network. Departments aligned under the new compliance standards. Subsidiaries reported transparently, and the international divisions responded smoothly to integration plans. Each step reinforced the structure I had carefully built, solidifying the empire I had quietly orchestrated. My parents, gradually absorbing the reality of the situation, began to adjust to their new roles. Mom's cautious pride showed in subtle comments about operational improvements, while Dad navigated his responsibilities with a new awareness of oversight and accountability. The lectures that had once defined our dinners shifted into a tentative dialogue, a minor reconciliation acknowledging competence they had underestimated. As I reviewed the final reports and confirmed that the board and international teams were aligned, I reflected on the months of preparation, the careful orchestration of each acquisition, and the patience required to let events unfold without revealing my hand prematurely. Their disbelief and skepticism had only sharpened the satisfaction of seeing strategy executed flawlessly. The empire was in place, the legacy reshaped, and the lessons clear. I closed my laptop and took a final glance at the city skyline, knowing that every underestimated move, every deliberate step, had led to this moment where control, foresight, and careful planning defined success. The chandeliers glittered above me as though nothing in the world could fracture their light. Music swelled, laughter spilled across the ballroom, and yet I stood frozen in the center of it all. My sister's voice slicing through the celebration. "Give me the penthouse keys. Naomi." Her words were sharp enough to still the chatter of 280 guests. Some clutched champagne flutes mid-air, others glanced between us, unsure if they had heard correctly. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks, the weight of every eye pressing down. That place was Uncle David's legacy, I said, steady but quiet. "It belongs to me." Vivian's face, framed by her veil, twisted with something uglier than surprise. "You're too young to waste it. You don't even deserve it." I shook my head, the silk of my dress rustling faintly as if to remind me I was still part of this wedding, still a guest, still her sister. But Vivian stepped closer, eyes blazing, and before I could move, her hand cracked across my cheek. The sound echoed louder than the string quartet. My glasses flew to the floor and skidded across the polished tiles. The entire room went silent except for the pounding in my ears. Pain blossomed on my skin, but the deeper wound was the gasps around me, friends, colleagues, even relatives watching without stepping forward. I bent to retrieve my glasses, hands trembling, vision blurred. When I rose again, Vivian stood tall in her white lace, smoothing her gown as though nothing had happened. "You're not welcome here anymore," she declared, her voice ringing clear as crystal. I swallowed the burn in my throat, straightened my back, and walked toward the grand doors. Not one guest stopped me. My heels clicked against the marble, each step heavier than the last until the night air hit me outside. On the sidewalk beneath the plaza's golden awning, I pulled out my phone. My fingers shook as I dialed the number I had avoided for months. "Michael," I whispered when he answered. "Bring the documents. To the plaza. Now." I ended the call and stared at the revolving doors behind me, knowing that in 30 minutes, the evening would no longer belong to my sister. It would belong to the truth. As I stood beneath the plaza's awning, the cold from the marble steps climbing into my bones, memories began pressing forward. They always did when Vivian cornered me, wearing that smile that others mistook for charm. "You're too young for that place," she'd said more times than I could count. At first, it was almost teasing an older sister joking about how her little sibling lived like a Wall Street executive. But soon, the tone sharpened. "You can't handle the upkeep. A penthouse isn't some college studio you lucked into." At Sunday dinners, what began as casual conversation turned into ambushes. Vivian and her fiancé would speak as if I wasn't in the room. Naomi should sell and invest in something sensible. She'd say over roast chicken, while her fiancé nodded. The market's hot. She'd be crazy not to cash out. My fork would hang in midair, my parents shifting uncomfortably as if they wanted to change the subject but didn't dare. The words burrowed into me. I was 29. Yes, and the youngest in the family to own anything close to a penthouse. Sometimes I wondered if they were right. The elevator repairs, the constant association fees, the unspoken expectation that I didn't belong among neighbors who were decades older and wealthier, it wore on me. I began to shrink at gatherings, avoiding mention of my home, keeping my keys tucked deep in my purse like they were something shameful. When Vivian leaned close at one family birthday and whispered, "Don't worry, I'll help you make the right decision when the time comes," I almost believed she meant well. But now, after the slap, after the silence of hundreds of guests watching me fall, I could see every remark for what it had been: not guidance, not sisterly concern, but erosion. Slowly, deliberately. She had been chiseling away at my confidence until tonight, when she finally struck in front of everyone. I pressed the phone tighter in my hand. 30 minutes. Michael would be here. And when he arrived, the years of quiet insults and false advice would meet the truth I had kept hidden. When Uncle David died, I was 24 and still drafting blueprints in a tiny Brooklyn studio. He had been more than an uncle. He was the one who encouraged me through architecture school, who sat with me at night sketching impossible skylines just to see how far imagination could stretch. I never expected him to leave me his penthouse overlooking Central Park. At the reading of his will, even my parents looked stunned. David had made his money quietly, developing small but significant urban projects in Queens and the Bronx. He hated extravagance, which was why he lived modestly until the last decade of his life. But he told me once, during a walk along Riverside Drive, "This space belongs to someone who sees the city as possibility, not profit. You'll know what to do with it when the time comes." The gift came wrapped not only in walls of glass and stone, but also in paper, dozens of documents filed in a trust he had set up years earlier. Michael Rowan, his lawyer, explained each clause patiently, though at the time I barely understood. Buried in that language was something David had insisted on: a protection known as a bad actor clause. If any relative attempted to coerce, threaten, or undermine me regarding the property, they would automatically be removed from any share of the broader family trust. For years, I kept that binder hidden in my desk drawer, sealed and almost forgotten, like an insurance policy I hoped never to use. To bring it forward meant exposing family secrets, dragging private grievances into the light. I told myself Vivian's comments weren't serious, that she was just lashing out, that we could still be sisters without bringing lawyers into it. But tonight, my cheek still stinging, I realized David had foreseen this. He knew family greed could be sharper than any stranger's blade. The documents were not just legal armor, they were his way of protecting me when he no longer could. The real question was whether I had the courage to wield them. 30 minutes from now, the choice would no longer be hypothetical. I could already hear the shuffle of polished shoes approaching from the curb. The phone felt heavier than it should, slick in my hand as if even the night air wanted to wrest it away. Michael's voice answered steady as always, the same voice that had walked me through Uncle David's will 5 years ago. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Bring the binder," I said, "the one with the trust papers, to the plaza, tonight." He didn't ask why. He only paused long enough for me to hear the hum of his office lamp through the receiver. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. When the call ended, silence wrapped around me. The plaza's revolving doors spun with guests coming and going, their laughter muffled behind glass. I stayed on the steps, the imprint of Vivian's hand still warm on my cheek. Rage burned in one corner of me. How dare she humiliate me in front of everyone? But grief pressed in from the other side, the weight of what this meant. Once Michael arrived, there would be no pretending it was just another family quarrel. I tried to breathe, but every inhale tasted like betrayal. My own sister, the girl who once braided my hair before high school dances, had turned me into an obstacle to be removed. Somewhere inside me, a younger version of myself still wanted her approval, still longed for the easy laughter we used to share. But the slap had broken something beyond repair. My fingers tightened around the strap of my purse as headlights swept across the curb. I knew Michael's car would be next. The moment it arrived, the night would belong not to Vivian's wedding, but to the truth David had left behind, waiting for me to claim it. Michael arrived with the precision of someone who had lived his life on deadlines. His gray suit was unremarkable, but the leather binder in his hand drew every eye as we re-entered the ballroom. The music faltered, the quartet lowering their bows mid-note, conversations stilled as he stepped forward, calm as if this were a boardroom instead of a wedding. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice carrying easily in the gilded hall. "I apologize for the interruption, but I have urgent business with Ms. Naomi Alton and Mrs. Vivian Dwyer." Gasps rippled. Vivian froze near the head table, her new husband clutching her arm. I stood a few paces back, my pulse thrumming, as Michael opened the binder and began, "As counsel to the late David Alton, I am here to announce the withdrawal of all financial guarantees previously extended in his niece's name. This includes the balance of tonight's reception." A murmur broke across the room. Waiters exchanged anxious glances. The manager of the plaza stepped forward. Uncertain, Vivian's smile wavered. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice pitched too high. Michael ignored her tone and laid out printouts on the head table screenshots of credit reports. Foreclosure notices, collection letters. These documents confirm significant outstanding debts under Mrs. Dwyer's name and her spouse's. More concerning are records of multiple attempts to duplicate keys for Ms. Alton's residence, as well as email correspondence implying intent to force a transfer of property. The whispers swelled into open chatter. Phones appeared in hands. Several guests began recording, angling for clear shots of the papers. Vivian lunged toward the table, knocking over a champagne flute, but her husband held her back. "That's a lie," she spat, but her voice cracked. She glanced around desperately, searching for allies, but found only cameras. I felt no triumph, only the ache of exposure. Every private humiliation, every whispered dig, was now public currency. Yet, as Michael closed the binder with deliberate finality, I realized there was no way back to silence. The mask Vivian had worn for years had split, and the fragments were cutting her before anyone else. She turned on me then, eyes wild, as the room waited for her next move. Vivian's panic hardened into fury. She pointed across the room, her veil trembling as she shook. "Don't believe her. Naomi is unstable. She's too young, reckless, unfit to manage anything, let alone a penthouse. She's been playing house in a property she can't possibly afford to keep." Her words were sharp enough to sting, and a few guests actually nodded, murmuring as if the idea held merit. I felt the blood drain from my face. For years, I had hidden how overwhelming the maintenance could be, how often I skipped dinners out to cover fees, how lonely the rooms felt at night. Maybe they were right. Maybe I wasn't enough. Vivian seized the moment. She's living off scraps of an old man's fortune. She doesn't understand responsibility. She never has. Tonight, she's trying to ruin my wedding because she can't stand seeing me happy. The guests shifted, caught between scandal and sympathy. I opened my mouth, but no sound came. My throat tightened, the weight of their eyes pressing down harder than Vivian's slap ever had. Then, a voice rang out from the back. "That's enough." Heads turned as Aunt Margaret, cane tapping against the marble, stepped into the center. At 84, she carried the kind of authority that silenced a room. Her gaze swept over Vivian, then rested on me with quiet steadiness. "I heard you, Vivian," she said, "2 nights ago, in your parents' kitchen. You told your fiancé you'd have Naomi's keys before the honeymoon. You said you'd move in upstairs as soon as she broke. The murmurs turned. This time, they weren't against me. Vivian blanched, her mouth opening and closing, but no words formed. I inhaled, the knot in my chest loosening as Margaret's hand brushed my shoulder. For the first time that night, I wasn't standing alone, and I could feel the balance shifting. Aunt Margaret didn't just stand on her word. She reached into her handbag, pulled out her phone, and held it up. I recorded the voicemail, she said, her voice carrying with the weight of someone who had seen too much to be ignored. With a few taps, Vivian's voice filled the ballroom, tinny but unmistakable. Don't worry, the recording played. I'll have Naomi's keys before we're back from the honeymoon. Moving in upstairs will solve everything. Gasps rose from the tables. Some guests covered their mouths. Others leaned in closer, hungry for every word. Vivian lunged forward, hissing, "That's private," but it was too late. The sound of her own voice betrayed her more loudly than anything I could have said. Before she could recover, Michael lifted another document from his binder. We also have testimony from the building manager at Central Park West. He received a written request under Mrs. Dwyer's signature to duplicate Ms. Alton's penthouse keys. The request was flagged for irregularities and denied. We have retained the original for the court. The manager himself stepped forward from the crowd, a stout man in a blazer who had clearly been waiting for this moment. That's right, he said, voice firm. I called Naomi that day because it didn't feel right. The signature was sloppy, and the urgency she said she needed keys before the wedding made me suspicious. Vivian's new husband tried to speak, but his face gave him away first. Red blotches crept up his neck, and sweat beaded on his forehead. Someone from his side of the family whispered, "The loans. Oh, God, the loans." He turned sharply to Vivian, his whisper too loud not to carry. They know, Viv, they know about the defaults, about the bank letters. The crowd erupted in low voices, the atmosphere shifting from disbelief to recognition. The perfect image Vivian had crafted designer dress, golden hair, confident smile crumbled before us all. I stood motionless, heart steady for the first time that night. Piece by piece, the truth was stacking higher than her excuses could reach, and it was only a matter of time before the final blow landed. Michael's voice cut through the rising chaos with the calm certainty of law. He opened the binder once more and read aloud the clause Uncle David had insisted upon. Any heir who attempts to coerce, threaten, or manipulate Naomi Alton in relation to the Central Park West property shall be deemed a bad actor and immediately removed from any share of the Alton family trust. The words fell like stones in water, sending ripples through the crowd. Vivian's face drained of color. For years, she had counted on the trust as her safety net, the one thing that would shield her from the mountain of debt she and her husband had built. Now, with a few sentences, the rope had been cut. "No," she whispered at first, then louder, until her voice cracked. "No, please. I didn't mean it like that. I was scared. Naomi, I just wanted to feel secure, to know I wouldn't lose everything again." Her hands trembled as she reached toward me, her veil slipping askew. "You're my sister. You can't take this from me. You know I've always struggled. Please, I was desperate." Her words pierced deeper than I wanted to admit. We had shared a bedroom as children, whispered secrets under blankets, laughed until our sides ached. For a moment, I saw not the woman who had slapped me, but the girl who once braided my hair before picture day. But that girl had grown into someone willing to humiliate me in front of hundreds, willing to forge signatures and plot behind my back. My throat tightened, but my decision held. "I didn't take anything from you," I said quietly. "You gave it up the moment you chose greed over family." Vivian crumpled into her husband's arms, sobbing, as guests pulled out their phones to capture the final unraveling. Michael closed the binder with a firm snap, and I felt the weight of Uncle David's foresight resting solidly in my hands. The penthouse was mine to protect. But more than that, so was my dignity. The night wasn't over yet, but the battle for my home had just been won. By morning, my phone was flooded with notifications, clips from the ballroom, Vivian's slap, Michael's declaration. My words circulated online under headlines I never asked for, the sister who fought back. Commenters turned me into a symbol of dignity fights back, though all I had wanted was to survive one night without losing myself. News outlets reached out, some praising my resolve, others feasting on the spectacle. I ignored them all. The penthouse had never felt quieter. I changed the locks the next day, the new keys cold and unfamiliar in my hand. For the first time in months, I slept with the windows open, the city hum below reminding me I still belonged. Meanwhile, Vivian and her husband unraveled quickly. Eviction notices, lawsuits from creditors, whispers in social circles that once applauded them, it all collapsed in days. I watched from a distance, heart heavy even in vindication. She had chosen this path, but she was still my sister. I spent long evenings pacing the penthouse, asking myself whether winning meant anything if it left me standing alone. Childhood memories surfaced in sharp contrast: birthday candles we once blew out together, promises we made when our parents divorced. They felt like photographs left too long in the sun, fading until only the outlines remained. Yet when I touched the trust documents stacked neatly on my desk, I felt Uncle David's steady presence. This wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting the life I had built, the home entrusted to me. I sat at the window that night, lights of the city glittering against the glass. The world now saw me as a figure of strength, but inside I wrestled with the silence family leaves behind. And in that silence, I began to wonder what came next. Months passed before I could walk into the penthouse without feeling the echo of that night. The ballroom confrontation had branded me as something larger than myself, but I knew the story couldn't end there. Uncle David had trusted me with more than real estate. He had trusted me to use my voice, with Michael's help. I established the Alton Young Voices Fund, a foundation dedicated to helping young women secure and defend the property or assets left to them. Too many were told they were too young, too naive, or too unprepared. Just as Vivian had told me, applications came from across the country, a 23-year-old in Chicago defending her grandmother's duplex, a law student in Dallas fighting her uncle's claim to farmland. Reading their letters, I saw reflections of my own fear and found purpose in guiding them through it. The penthouse became not a fortress, but a workshop. We hosted small gatherings, strategy sessions, quiet circles where women shared stories they had been too ashamed to tell. Each time, I felt the space transform from a contested prize into a place of strength. One evening, after the last of the group had left, I stood by the front door. On the wall beside it hung a small brass hook. I placed a single key there not to remind me of what others had tried to take, but to remind myself of what I chose to keep. It was no longer a symbol of fear, but of respect. Hard-won and non-negotiable. Keys open doors. Only respect lets you live inside.